We're going to do something a little bit different with this episode. I'm not even going to give you a spoiler alert. You're just going to have to keep listening. Come on, this will be fun. Hey there, and welcome to episode 335 of the Roadmap to Referrals podcast, a show that proves you can generate referrals without asking or manipulation. I'm your host, Stacey Brown Randall. My journey from a business failure to a successful business, now 11 years in, I know generating referrals naturally and consistently has made all the difference. Working with clients around the world, we leverage the science of referrals, protect relationships above all else, and help you build a referable business. So this is an entirely different episode, and it's one I had considered doing last year, and then somehow it didn't happen. Somehow there just wasn't room for it within the editorial calendar, and I was like, nope, it's happening this year. I'm calling this episode Now and Then. Or should I say then and now? No, now and then. Okay. So what I'm doing for this episode, it's something I was going to do last year for my 10-year anniversary and then didn't, was to really just look back, and I'm going to give you kind of like a what was going on back then versus how things are working in my business now. And the way I decided to do this, because in 11 years, let's be honest, so much has changed. Oh my goodness, so much has changed. And it'll probably in 11 years from now, so much will probably have changed. I don't know, maybe not. I feel like the last 4 years I have made less changes in the last 3 years after I made some massive changes 4 years ago. I've made less changes in the last couple of years. So maybe there won't be many changes. But did this business go through some shifts and changes when it started? And so what I've decided to do is listen. You and I are going to listen together to episode 1. That's right, the very first episode from this podcast. Now, not the whole episode. We're going to go in and we're going to edit out each of the tidbits that I talk about in that very first episode. So this is episode 1. If you've never listened to it, maybe you're more of a newer listener to the podcast. Maybe you're just new this week, new this year, or just new in the last couple of years, and you're like, Stacey, you're 300 something episodes in. I'm not going back to the first one. But a lot of people do go back to the first one. And I hear that, which is fascinating to me. And I guess I never thought about it. But a lot of people will find this podcast multiple ways. But they'll find this podcast and they'll listen to the most recent episode. And if I maybe reference another episode, they'll go listen to that one. And then they jump all the way back to episode number 1 and listen to a couple going forward. And that's back from 2018. Like that's forever ago. So I thought it'd be really cool if I could do an episode where we're gonna listen to each of the points I talk about in the first episode, and I'm gonna give you my thoughts on it, like my reactions to what I said all the way back in 2018. We're talking 6 months ago? Like it was a long time ago. So episode 1 dropped June 28th of 2018. That's about 4 months or a little less than 4 months before the book came out in October of that year. My first book, Generating Business Referrals Without Asking. I've been saying my first book for forever, and now it's actually real because book number 2 will be out and available for purchase in September or October of 2025, which I'm very excited about. So this podcast started, the first episode that dropped, the first episode title was 7 Ways I Overcame a Business Failure. So what I'm going to do is I am going to listen to each of the 7 pieces of advice I give. Like you guys are going to hear it, right? We're going to listen to it together. And then I'm going to give you my opinion, like my thoughts on it. Like, do I still believe that? Do I not believe that? Has nothing changed? Like, do I have additional advice to give you? Do I think that advice is so solid? I have nothing to share. We're going to do this for each of those 7 ways that I talk about overcoming a business failure. And so if you haven't listened to the whole episode, you certainly can do that. But really, I'm just going to give you the highlights of those 7 ways. So a little bit of backstory. September of 2013 was the start of this business. And it came because my first business that I had, but prior to this business, failed after 4 years. I had to go back to corporate America. I had to get a job. It's a really painful story, but I did it. I was in that job for about 15, 16 months. And then I started this business in September of 2013. And so I go through, so think about that. This business started September of 2013, but this podcast episode where I talked about the 7 ways I overcame a business failure was done in June of 2018. Right. So what is that? You guys all know I have to count on my hands. If you don't know that about me, you're about to find out. Okay, 2013 to 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. I guess 5 years. I know you're probably like, gosh, you're really bad at math, Stacey. And guess what? Yeah, you would not be wrong. Okay. And that's okay. I'm okay with myself. So 5 years later, I did an episode on the 7 ways I overcame a business failure. So this wasn't like, here's how I overcame a business failure and I'm my first year in business. Like I had 5 years under my belt and I did a reflective look back. And that's how I decided to kick off this podcast is I need to acknowledge the fact that I had this business failure. I learned a bunch of stuff. It's actually why I teach what I teach today, my referral strategy. It's why I teach what I teach. So I thought this would be really cool. We'll just do it then and now. So you're going to hear a snippet from the podcast where I'm talking about one of the 7 ways, and then it's going to come back to me in present day, and I'll tell you it's me in present day. I think you'll actually be able to tell the difference in my voice. I listened to a little bit of episode 1 before I started recording for you guys right now, and I can hear the nervousness in my voice. So since it was my first one. So anyways, but I will also be like, okay, back to present, Stacey, right? Back to me of today. And I will give you my opinion on what we just listened to. So I thought this would be kind of a cool way to do this. If you want to go back and listen to the entire episode, it is staceybrownrandall.com/1, as in like the number 1, just the 1. And remember, back then the podcast was called Roadmap to Grow Your Business. A couple years ago, we changed it to Roadmap to Referrals. And there's other things you'll notice that are different if you go back and listen to the episode. Like back then, I actually had like a professional introduction, and now it's just me reading the introduction. Like we've evolved, we've changed, the music has changed, like lots of things have changed. But hopefully not that you enjoy it. Hopefully that has stuck around for the many, 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 many years that we have done this podcast. So again, that was the big thing I want you to know. I recorded this podcast, episode 1, the first episode of this podcast, with the 7 ways I overcame a business failure 5 years into this successful business, this business. So this wasn't like, here's 7 ways I overcame business failure and I'm 30 days into this new business. No, I was 5 years in. So just want to put some context in there for you. For those of you who are newer to me, maybe this year and the last couple of years, like I just want you to understand like how I'm setting this up and what this is like. Okay, so here we're going to go. We're going to dive in and we're going to play the first thing I talked about with how I came, way number 1, that I overcame a business failure. All right, so number 1 of the 7 ways that I am avoiding another business failure is working on the mindset. The truth is, with my first business, I was really excited to get started. And then my mindset took a beating. I listened a little too much to what others thought about my business, whether they were well-meaning or not. And when a well-meaning colleague once told me, "Oh, Stacey, with 2 small kids under the age of 2 building a business, you're just building a lifestyle business, not a business that grows and develops." Well, I bought in, hook, line, and sinker. Now, buying in, that was my fault. But what I didn't have into place was the ability to protect my mindset and the ability to shut those noises and to shut those voices out. I definitely was an active participant in letting my mindset get damaged and definitely impact my business failure. And so today, I'm a much better participant of protecting my mindset. I'll read books that'll help me remember and remind myself why I'm doing what I do. I set a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal to make sure that I am always focused on what matters most. And I use visual reminders to remind me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So when my first business failed, I had to go get a job. That's right, the job, back to corporate America, the 9 to 5. And at that company, I had a nameplate that was outside the door of my office. When I left that job to start my second business, I asked to take that nameplate with me. It said Stacey Randall, Chief Talent Officer. I took that nameplate with me, and now it sits above my door in my office as a visual reminder that I'm not going back to where I came from. So I actively work on protecting my mindset. And I do that by reading the right books, by making sure I'm really clear on my why, and using visual reminders so I don't fall into the trap of believing possibly what other people think of my business. Now, I'll put in the show notes for you a couple of lists of books that I think are great for you to read that'll help you with your mindset too. Just a couple of them are The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. I think it's a great book for understanding how to get to the next level with your business. And another couple of ones that I have in there too, You Are a Badass at Making Money. Those are some great books to read, and I'll make sure that you can get those in the show notes. Here's a question for you. How's your mindset? When things get tough, how do you protect it? There will always be the doubters, the haters, and those well-meaning people who have negative things to say. But if you're going to grow a business to be successful, and one thing I'm definitely doing different with business number 2 is I'm protecting my mindset. And you need to be willing to do the same. So let me know, how is your mindset today? Okay, this back to present day Stacy. This is crazy for me talking about mindset because nothing has changed. And what's crazy, when I recorded this and this came live in 2018, I was really focused on mindset. But what's crazy is a couple years later, I would become even more focused on mindset. And I would say over the last 2 to 3 years, I would say, it's definitely 2022, 2023, and all of 2024 has been an even higher focus on mindset, like taking this to the next level for how I protect my mindset. So I think that's awesome. Nothing's really changed. I talk about reading books. I talk about understanding my why. I talk about visual reminders. I still do all those things. So that's definitely like something that has helped me get more and more successful, which is awesome and amazing. So yes, I am a big fan of books that you can read that will help you protect your mindset and help you develop and grow. I used to only really read business books, like specific business books, and I have evolved in some of my reading taste to reading some different books that are a little bit more focused on mindset and the psychology of that and things like that, which is awesome. So, I still read a lot of business books. Well, I don't read nearly as many as I used to. I really need my kids to go to college so I can get back to my reading practice. But yeah, I love it. Nothing's changed. Like, yes, visual reminders, books, understanding my why. My why has evolved, not really too much. My family has always been the big part of my why, but it does continue to evolve. Every season of life that we shift into, I notice that my why changes just a little bit, and grounding myself back to that, I think is really important. Like the main why doesn't change, but I think the peripheral pieces, or like that outer ring or the next ring out of my why, kind of shifts and changes just because life changes and I get older and my kids get older and life changes. So I think that's really cool. Okay, so now let's go listen to number 2. All right, moving on along to number 2. The second way that I am building my business different from my business failure is I have a focused sales plan. Now, here's the thing. We can all be schooled in all the ways to bring in clients. There are so many activities you can do to bring in clients. And activities, like cold call, direct mail, network, one-on-one coffees, attend trade shows, set up some advertising, Facebook ads. There are so many different activities that you can do that will be bringing in new clients to you. But here's what I realized. I went through a process of doing a lot of stuff and then trying to figure out what worked. And having a focused sales plan has made all the difference for my business continuing to grow year after year after year. So I started out by writing down the activities I thought would work. And let's be honest, what I really mean is the activities I'm willing to do. So I knew I could do one-on-one networking. I knew I could give free speaking engagements, and I definitely wanted to figure out how to generate referrals. So I figured out a plan to work those activities. But here's the secret. I then created a dashboard to track my activity and results. So an example is in my first year of my second business, I wanted to give 12 free presentations, just groups that I would go and speak to that had my ideal client in the audience. And I would go speak on my topics of expertise. And when I created a dashboard to make sure I actually did those 12 speaking engagements, guess how many I actually landed in my first year? 23. What Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. And I was measuring it, so it was happening. So when you think about what you're trying to accomplish, having a focused sales plan is really important. And having a dashboard that holds you accountable is super important to making sure that you're actually doing the work you say you need to be doing. Now, I put a freebie that you can download in the show notes for today's episode that actually will have a kind of a sneak peek at what that dashboard should look like. You may take my idea and change it up to work best for you, but this is exactly what I used my very first year starting my business. And I think if you don't have a focused sales plan, you are definitely going to need one. And it allows you to understand what's working and what's not working, which is really important in terms of ROI and metrics. Present day Stacy here. Oh my gosh. Like sometimes I listen to these things and I'm like, wow, I was really brilliant back then. Sorry, that was like the least humble thing I could say, but it's so true. I was like, yes. That focused sales plan, like nothing's changed except for how I think about it. That's changed. So that's what I want to talk about. So in that clip, you heard me talk about the 3 activities that I did when I was starting my business back in 2013. I did a lot of one-on-one networking. I mean, we're talking about 7 million cups of coffee. Like I'd sit at Starbucks and I would like stack those meetings because I wanted people to understand that I had left the corporate job, that I wasn't going back to what my business failure had been, and that I was launching this new business. And so, which then, of course, was a productivity and business coaching practice. And I did a lot of coffee meetings and like a lot of one-to-one networking in terms of those coffee meetings, meeting people for coffee. And then, of course, I did networking itself. But then I also talked about free speaking engagements and then obviously figuring out referrals, which changed the entire game for my business. That really, when those first couple of months in 2013, and I started to receive referrals towards like the end of my 3rd month in business, like that's what I latched onto and changed everything. But I talk about my secret is having a dashboard to track results. I'm actually going to link to that. We still have that freebie, I think I called it. I don't think we call things freebies anymore. I think we just call them resources because we've grown up. But I'm going to link to that resource. It's like a multi-page PDF that kind of walks through the things you need to know for each of the 7 tips that I talk about, or each of the 7 ways that I overcame business failure. So like tip number 1 had a bunch of books that I would have recommended. Of course, this is back from 2018, which those books are all still good. So I'm going to link to that in case you want to see what this dashboard looks like, because tracking those results is really, really key. I have evolved in how I think about my focused sales plan. And if you listen to episode 273, I will link to that in the show notes page. That episode is called My Leads Framework. And how I think about the focused sales plan of now in my business versus back then in the first 5 years of my business. How I think about it now is everything, the activities that I do, right? That's what a focused sales plan is, the activities you're going to do. How I think about my focused sales plan of today is more from a lead generating, lead nurturing, and lead conversion. It's like a 3-part process. So what do I do that generates new leads or new prospects? What do I do that nurtures those prospects into wanting to work with me? And what are the things that I do that converts those folks to actually saying yes to working with me? And so I do look at it differently, and you can hear all about that in episode 273. Obviously, a big part of how I work with folks are referrals. Like, it's interesting when I pay attention to like the things that I want to do, like on social media, or the things that I want to get better at. And people are like, well, are you looking to get leads from LinkedIn? I'm like, no. I mean, that would be great. I'm not going to say no to that. But I actually look at LinkedIn or Instagram. Those are the 2 main social media platforms that I'm on. Those are lead nurturing. It's like, hey, we've connected somehow. More than likely, you were probably referred to me, or somebody recommended my book to you, or you heard me on a podcast. There are other ways, but those are going to probably be or you heard me give a presentation. Those would probably be the main ways that you're going to stumble upon me. And so sometimes people find me cold on LinkedIn, but not normally. That's not to say that there's not a strategy for that. I know. I just don't have to do it. But I'm looking at those platforms as how I nurture things. So I think that helps you kind of figure out where you spend your time. So back then, when you listened to that tip, it was more about what am I doing to get some clients in the door? Of course, figuring out referrals changed everything. I rarely do one-on-one networking. I don't actually go to networking events anymore. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm missing a little bit of that human connection. I do a lot over Zoom with people, but I haven't needed it. I don't have to spend a lot of time networking, because I have referrals, because I've developed relationships, and then I know how to take care of those relationships, because that's what I teach people to do. And I practice what I preach. So I don't know. This is really cool. The focus sales plan, that thing like worked, and it helped my business be successful. So I think that you should definitely, absolutely maybe just re-listen to that point. Go download that resource if you want to, but really go listen to episode 273 when I talk about my leads framework. Like that's how it's evolved today, looking at what I do when I'm trying to generate new people as prospects, when I am looking at bringing those people through a nurture process and like nurturing them and then getting them to convert to a client. So I don't know if you guys can hear my dog in this room sometimes lately. I don't know if you guys know this. We have like a almost 6-year-old. She's still a puppy to me because she's like 6 pounds, little Maltese. Maybe you've seen some of her pictures on social media. She is the most beautiful, most adorable dog in the world. Anyways, she just kind of went through like a coughing fit. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but if you do hear that, it's my little puppy. She's not a puppy, but I still call her my puppy. Okay, let's move on. Let's get on to number 3. Let's listen to the third way that I overcame a business failure. Hey there, pardon the interruption. So as a longtime listener of this podcast, you've probably heard me mention my Building a Referable Business coaching program, but that's only one of the 3 ways to work with me. We have my starter course, which we call Your Next 5 Referrals. It's a great way to dip your toe in and get some of the basics in place ASAP. You can do it quickly, like in a matter of hours. Or if you have a small team and you want me to do all the work, you want me to build your strategy for you, then my VIP experience is probably right for you. And then, of course, right there in the middle between our starter course, Your Next 5 Referrals, and my VIP experience is the one we've been doing now for getting ready to start in our 5th year, which is the Building a Referable Business coaching program, the 12-month coaching program. So you know what these ways are. My question for you is, why aren't we working together? Find the one that's right for you and come join me. I would love to help you take control of your referrals. Finally, start this new year in a different way. Start it with a baseline of strong strategies in place, and let's get that referral explosion for you next year. Okay, now let's get back to this episode. All right, let's listen in to the third way I overcame a business failure. All right, number 3, moving right along. Know thy numbers. That's right. As a business coach, I work with multiple 6-figure and $1 million business clients. And it is always shocking to me, those who don't know their numbers. And I'm not talking about just your revenue and your expenses, right? I'm not talking just about the current or the past expenses or revenue you've made. I'm talking about the ability to project what's coming. What do you need to be focused on? What do you need to do so that you can actually know what income or revenue you're going to be bringing in? I don't know why there is so much resistance to actually projecting out our business. But if we can't project out what we're hoping to bring in or what we're working to bring in, all we're doing is looking back to what's happened. And knowing our numbers is so very important. Look, let's be honest. Some months, even if you've been in business a couple of years, your projections for what you're thinking will come in will be a big fat 0. That's okay. But here's what I would tell you. As you start working with clients or as you're working towards building up your 2nd and 3rd year, you're going to have some numbers you can work with. You're going to be able to pay attention to some projections in the future. You need to know what revenue you expect your business to bring in so you can balance that against the expenses you know you're going to have. And here's the thing. You don't know what you don't know until you write it down and track it. So you have to know your numbers. You can't just guess and you can't just assume. You need to make sure that you have put in place a habit of tracking your numbers. So I have a client that I worked with, and the question was for him always, right? He was bringing in $20,000 to $30,000 every month, but was always cash poor. The truth is he never really got into the daily habit of tracking his billables. And I say daily habit just because that's the way it worked in his business. It's probably not necessary for yours. But this client, he finally decided to switch into the habit of tracking his work output, his billables. And then all of a sudden he realized that he was able to bring in the money he needed to run his business, $20,000 to $30,000 a month. And he could project out what to expect and balance that out against his expenses. Now, to be honest, the accounting part of your business and knowing your numbers, that is a whole other episode in and of itself. But I know too many people who can't tell me, what is your business doing this year and what do you project it to do? And you need to be able to answer those questions. So it's important you get really cozy with your accounting software or your accountant or your bookkeeper or that Excel spreadsheet. Doesn't matter to me, but you have to be able to project and you have to know your numbers. You can't just guess your way through running a business that you want to be successful. Oh, present day Stacy here. The numbers. Yes, they either make you really excited or they maybe strike a little bit of fear and dread in you. Oh, knowing your numbers, like I said in that clip, it's so much more than revenue and expenses. It's your ability to project, right? It's your ability to, well, there will always be some guessing and some assumptions in your business of what's going to happen because you never know. You could have the best year ever. It's still good to know, like, hey, what am I doing this year and what am I expected to do? I love how I said, get cozy with your numbers. It's so true. So what's interesting as I listen to that clip, this is before, because this was summer of 2018. So this is before I put profit first in my business. I did not institute profit first in my business until August, September of 2019. So it was like more than a year later, but I was a spreadsheet tracker. I mean, I've had a bookkeeper since pretty much the very beginning of this business. And of course, a CPA. If I'm not having to get into QuickBooks, and I'm obviously never going to do my own taxes, let's be honest. But I've always had a CPA and started using a bookkeeper when I started this business because that was necessary because I was terrible at keeping up with QuickBooks. So they helped me stay cozy with my numbers. But it's interesting that I still had that mindset around understanding your numbers and knowing what it looks like. Because here's the thing, I never knew my numbers. I never knew if I was in the black or the red with my first business that failed, that HR consulting firm, the one that landed me in the Business Failure Club. And so that was a strong focus that I took, like, what are my upcoming expenses? What does that look like? What do I need to cover, right? It's kind of like understanding what your monthly nut is every month in your business and understanding that your revenue is above and beyond that. Obviously, that's what we want, and understanding what that looks like. And then I would say, then after I implemented Profit First, things really changed. I think I would give all the same advice that I gave about being cozy with your numbers and knowing thy numbers, but just now I look at it in an entirely different way. So if you're not familiar with Profit First, it is a book by Mike Michalowicz. It's actually I think it's a little bit of a mindset of how you think about your money, but it's actually how you manage your money. And yes, it does come with a whole bunch of bank accounts and a specific way to do something, but effectively it's making you take your profit first before you decide what you're going to use as your expenses. So if you're not familiar with it, we will link to Profit First in the show notes for this page. You should go check it out. It's probably one of my favorite books I've read of all time. I know one day, I'm just putting it out there to the universe, I'm going to meet Mike Michalowicz, and it's going to be great. And he's going to be as lovely in person as I imagine him to be when I listen to his podcast. And of course, I have been interviewed by him. I've been on his podcast, Grow Your Accounting Practice, but that was many years ago. But one day I know I'm going to meet him. Anyway, so I think once I put profit first in the business, it really did shift everything about how I managed my money. And I got really good at keeping you guys are going to laugh at me probably, but I have this massive spreadsheet that has every known expense on a yearly basis. So every piece of software that I pay every year, every service that I participate in every year is on this spreadsheet. It's broken down by what is reoccurring monthly versus what is reoccurring quarterly, and then what is an annual payment. So I always know going into a new year, this is the number. You got to hit it if you're going to be able to actually afford to run this business. Now, that doesn't necessarily always take into account maybe now we'll start taking into account, obviously, my virtual assistant, who is more on a permanent part-time basis. And then also some of the other folks that help me in my business. But I kind of know, I know what I'm going to range in paying my bookkeeper. Well, I know every month what I'm paying my bookkeeper, and even when I'm paying my CPA. I know all those numbers because I didn't know them just magically. I watched them happen in my business, but then I sat down and tracked them one year, and it was great. And so that's helped a lot. And then understanding that's what my business needs to run on. But with Profit First, it's like pulling out your tax and putting it into a special account, pulling out your profit from your monthly revenue and putting it in a special account. Just doing that, everything shifts and changes. You start to look at money different. I can't really explain it. Maybe I should be able to explain it better than I am. I feel like I'm fumbling here, but I can't really explain how everything changes. There was more money in my business just by changing how I looked at it. I didn't necessarily make any more money in 2019 than I had in 2018, but it looked different. And I know it's what helped me survive 2020 and actually come out ahead versus being in the red, which a lot of businesses went through in 2020 with COVID. So anyways, yes, know your numbers, friends. You got to know this stuff. Now, if you've been in business, for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you're probably like, yep. Yeah, of course, Stacey. Maybe for those of you who are in business the first couple of years, you're like, okay, good advice. I need to be doing this. But just know your numbers and have the right professional resources around you to know your numbers really well. Obviously, as your business grows and it gets bigger and you bring on more people, maybe you have people in your on your team who are doing that for you. But as a business owner, that is your responsibility to know your numbers. And that is looking at what it takes to run the business, projections of what you're going to do from a revenue perspective, all very important. So, okay, here's the thing. So I started this episode thinking that I was going to get through all 7 ways I overcame a business failure and give you my comments on those as well. I really thought that was going to happen. I was like, yeah, we're going to go through all 7 in one episode. And here we are coming up on 25 minutes and I've only gotten through 3. I'm not making this an hour-long episode. So we're going to cut this in 2. And I'm going to be back next week. And I'm going to talk to you about the other additional ways that I overcame a business failure, numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we will do those next week. So you're going to have to come back and listen to my commentary on what I think about what I said 5 years ago when it comes to, or was that more than 5 years ago, of what I was talking about with how I overcame a business failure. So, of course, we've mentioned a lot of resources. We've mentioned other episodes you can go listen to. We've mentioned other resources you can download. So all of that will be listed in the show notes page for this episode, which can be found at stacybrownrandall.com/335. That's 335. And Stacey has an E. So go to the resource page, 335, go to that page for the show notes for this, and you'll be able to find all the links to the previous episodes we were talking about, and of course, the resources you can download. All right, like I said, we're back with another great episode next week, and you already know what it's going to be. And we can't wait to get back. I can't wait to continue this. So until then, you know what to do, my friend. Take control of your referrals and build a referable business. Bye for now.